From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's coming up. K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek will walk through a checklist of pre-calving season management steps for you cow-calf producers, starting with assuring that cows and heifers are at an appropriate body condition score through feeding management and administering scours prevention vaccines in a timely fashion, among several other things that Gregg will cover next. Then from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen is back, this time to talk about the legal risks that you producers take when you defer payments on commodity sales to a buyer in the event that buyer encounters financial difficulties. And further ahead, K-State's Gus van Der Hoeven with another Stop, Look, and Listen here on Agriculture Today. Thanks for listening in to this midweek edition of Agriculture Today. You beef cow-calf producers well know we're around to that time soon where you'll be into another calving season. Prepping for that is of the utmost here, which we'll talk about now with our guest, who is with us every month to get into bovine health management. Gregg Hanzlicek is the director of the Production Animal Field Investigations Unit with the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at Kansas State University. This is a topic that isn't new by any stretch, Gregg, but there are always questions on producers' minds about being prepared for this critical juncture in their management.
Yeah, it's not new, and it seemed like yesterday is when we talked about it. And it only, for spring calvers, it comes around once a year. But because it only happens once a year, it's probably a good thing to just remind producers on some things that probably should be taken care of before the calving season starts.
Some of which need to happen almost immediately. And as those cows or heifers are in that third trimester, getting them in calving shape is paramount here, right?
Absolutely. We're approaching that end of the second trimester into the third trimester, and the metabolic demands of that cow or heifer in that third trimester, because of the pregnancy, the growth of the uterus, the placenta, the calf, plus their udders are growing, the metabolic demands for energy and protein increase tremendously during that third trimester. And one of the keys for a successful calving season and a production season is for those cows or heifers to be in the right body condition at calving, which would be a score of 5 to 7, somewhere in there.
How to get to that point if those females aren't there yet? Some feeding strategy might be appropriate here, you say.
Absolutely, and that's kind of why I want to talk about it today, is because if they're not, we see a lot of cows that are in the 4s right now, maybe even 3s, and we're far enough away from calving that we can add condition to these cows and heifers without being an economic burden on the producer. Really, it comes down to having a formulated ration that balances both for protein and both energy to get the condition up during that third trimester.
Are there targets to shoot for in that formulated diet as far as protein content or energy?
It's pretty standard. A third trimester 1,400-pound cow is going to need around 2 pounds of protein per day, and that's not 2 pounds of a protein supplement. Let's just say a 32% cake fed at 2 pounds, that's only about a half a pound of protein. So it's 2 pounds of total protein coming from the hay and whatever supplement, and then there's an energy value that's used also for that. And the reason we're talking about it now is that if we're 2 months away from calving and we're in poor body condition, it's virtually impossible to add enough condition on those cows in that last 60 days to make any difference, and economically it's going to be horrible.
But if you're on the edge, get started on that regimen pretty quickly then.
Absolutely. I would, if your veterinarian does nutrition, talk to them. But certainly there's a lot of county extension agents out there that know how to balance rations. Talk to them and get a good formulated ration going. It'll pay dividends when calving starts, trust me.
And in that same vein of timing and things that can be enacted now, preparing for scours outbreaks through a vaccination program in advance. By the label, that needs to get going fairly soon, right?
Absolutely. For producers that do like to use scour vaccine and their veterinarian has recommended it, there is a timing. Every label's a little different, so it's time for the producers to decide what vaccine they're going to use. look at the label, and then schedule on the calendar when they need to start injecting those cows and heifers. And as a reminder, the heifers, the ones coming with their first calf, these scour vaccines, these heifers are going to require 2 doses. So the cows, it's pretty easy. You read the label so many weeks before calving. Heifers is going to be a little bit different. They're going to need 2 doses. And the timing is very, very important.
Right. Your practitioner can help you get on the right schedule with those vaccinations. Again, tend to the nutrition in advance as well. But thinking ahead to the calving time itself, Gregg, where one is calving is important to biosecurity, and a good cleanup would be in order there.
Absolutely, especially for producers that are calving in a dry lot situation. Just getting in there and getting rid of all the manure in there and getting it down to the bare ground is beneficial. There's two major risk factors for scours. One is a lack of colostrum production, but the other one is a contaminated environment that these babies are born into. And so if we can get it as clean as possible and keep it as clean as possible, then that'll help prevent scours, it'll help prevent yonis and other diseases.
Aligned with that, though, planning ahead once more, that calving area established, but having some place to take those newborns and mama elsewhere, you say, pays off too in continuing a calving season free of scours and other pathogens.
Absolutely. And that, like I said, that calving area, keeping it as sanitized as possible is important. And so doing that, we do not want the calves that are being born or their mothers to continually contaminate with their manure. And so we have a calving area usually close to a working facility because we're concerned about dystocia. We don't want to move them very far. Once they're born, we don't have to worry about the dystocia. A really good way to prevent scours and yonis and others is move the pairs out away from those that haven't calved as often as you possibly can, certainly daily or every couple of days. And that just gets them away from the ones that haven't calved, and it keeps the ground cleaner.
Yeah, it's a proven practice. And you bring up dystocia. You have some numbers to share on calf losses related to calving difficulties.
Yep, the last national cow-calf survey that was completed showed that 27% of the calves that died between birth and weaning were because of dystocia. So every operation is going to have dystocia. In the same survey, it showed that about 10% of the heifers required some type of assistance and 4 to 6% of the cows. So most operations are going to have to help at least one animal during the calving season.
Anticipating that, then, your call now is for producers to be at the ready and have all of the necessary assistance equipment on hand and ready to operate.
Yeah, if we have our chains or our straps clean and ready and be able to find them, we've got our sleeves, and we want to use lube. Calf puller, is it working? Make sure that it's working. If we have all that stuff ready when there is a dystocia, we're not wasting time when we should be intervening with the calf. We have all our equipment there, and that's important. And then another thing is that sometimes it makes sense just to put in big letters somewhere or numbers the veterinarian's phone number, so that if you have a dystocia and you need a C-section or something like that, you know immediately what the number is to call.
You say, though, that one of the prime questions that seems to come up yearly, when should one intervene with a calving difficulty? And you say it's a balancing act, not too early, not too late.
Absolutely. So intervening too early, that we really run the risk of hurting the heifer or the cow. They're not dilated. We can tear up the tissues and cause some rupture, some vessels. It hurts the calf because it's a harder pull. And then too late, if we intervene too late, a lot of times that's when we end up with stillborn calves. So really the rules is once a heifer enters the second stage of labor, which would be when a producer notices that she's contracting or the water bag is showing or the feeder showing of the calf, we're going to give that heifer an hour. And if she hasn't given birth to that calf in an hour, we're going to get her in and investigate and do some intervention. A cow, we're only going to give 30 minutes. She should be able to, once she reaches second stage labor, she should be able to give birth to that calf within 30 minutes. Yeah. And again, those are pretty easy numbers to remember.
Yeah. But when in doubt, have the veterinarian on speed dial there.
Yeah, and absolutely. Another thing is that if there's a head back or a leg back or something, and the producer, if you can't get that remedied within about 15 minutes, call for help, whether it's a veterinarian or somebody that has more experience. But within 15 minutes, you should be able to get those things rectified.
If, in fact, the calf isn't up and nursing as one would hope, one might have to step in with a colostrum product.
Absolutely. We want all those calves to be up and nursing within 2 hours. For those calves that have a mother that has no interest in them, maybe she doesn't have any colostrum, or maybe the calf's hurt or anything like that, maybe it's weak, having some good commercial powdered milk replacer on hand so that they can be supplemented to the calf is really, really important.
And you want to be particular about the product you're using here? You want a replacement product?
Absolutely. I said supplement. It was supplemented, but we don't want to use colostrum supplements. We want to use colostrum replacers. And there's two types on the market. Some are made from colostrum and some are made from plasma. Research is pretty clear, at least right now, that the colostrum-based powdered replacers are the best way to go. And so I would recommend every producer have one or two of those bags of powdered replacer on hand during the calving season.
Well, there's a whole host of things that the cow-calf operator needs to think ahead to in readying for that calving season. But in closing, Greg, some of that starts immediately.
It does, and that's one reason why the cow-calf business is not all that easy, because there's a lot of balls that producers have to juggle all at the same time.
It is a challenging time, but it is the payoff of a successful calving season. These tips will help along that line if you think ahead, getting these things done. Greg, thank you as always. Gregg Hanzlicek from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at Kansas State University. And he's with us regularly to talk bovine health management on Agriculture Today. Welcome back to This Agriculture Today and our regular stint with Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. Well, Roger posted something in his blog series recently that's quite an interesting court development, and it illustrates a major point on making deferred payment contracts on agricultural sales. Roger, this is a practice commonly employed by producers for an assortment of reasons, actually, is it not?
Well, it sure is, Eric. And, of course, the big reason is for tax purposes. Mm-hmm. We push the tax liability off into the next year. And, of course, once you get on that deferral treadmill, then if you step off of that, you're going to get a pileup of income. You're going to get 2 years' worth of, in this instance, grain sales in 1 year. So you have a practice of selling in 1 year and deferring the receipt of the income to the next year. That's a practice that most farmers are going to want to continue to do from a tax planning standpoint. And it's commonly used by many farmers.
That said, there is a caveat, what you call the peril associated with these contracts, and it has to do with the status of the farmer in those arrangements if something goes awry with the buyer.
That's right. Unless you've taken some additional steps that we'll get into here in a moment, once you deliver the grain and before you get paid, you are an unsecured creditor of that buyer. And if that buyer defaults, such as files bankruptcy in the interim before you get paid, you then end up being an unsecured creditor, which means you go to the back of the line, and you're probably not going to get paid anything because the secured creditors, that elevator's lenders, that buyer's lenders, are going to sweep up everything in front of you. So it's not a very good position. In fact, it's a terrible position to put yourself in.
And, in fact, this was vividly illustrated in a court case this past month in Mississippi. If you would summarize the details on that for us.
Well, this was a group of farmers. They've now filed a class action against the elevator because they claim they didn't know that the elevator was actually insolvent, and it was, according to them, being propped up by the bank, which they actually sued. The bank is the defendant in this. What their claim is, and this has been filed, this is not a court opinion, this is just a filing as of November 8 of this year in Federal District Court, Southern District of Mississippi. And what they claimed was that the elevator actually only had about $4,000 in cash on hand throughout the spring. They owed $70 million indebtedness to the bank, two different loans, a $37 million balance on a revolving loan and a $33 million balance on a term note. And the bank just waited until all the grain from the fall harvest was in the elevator before they took action to foreclose on those loans and demand payment, full payment. Well, that forced forced the elevator into bankruptcy. And these farmers had delivered their grain, but they hadn't been paid. Now, there's no indication as I read the complaint that they were using formal deferred payment contracts. This was just the normal delay, it appears, from the time they delivered until there's a reconciliation on the elevator's books. They do an accounting, and they have to get that done before they make payment. So there was a deferral. There was a time lag. I can't tell whether they were deferring into the next year, but that's irrelevant from the standpoint in this case. They didn't get paid after they delivered. Bank filed bankruptcy. The farmers had taken no other steps to provide security for themselves, and they're left holding the bag.
As you say, they've taken action, has this group of farmers, against the bank in this instance. But as you point out, the bank's interest here is in securing that financial situation with that elevator.
Yeah, they didn't sue the elevator, they sued the bank, claiming that the bank basically set them up for failure here by waiting to foreclose on those loans. But if you look at it from the bank standpoint, the bank's not going to call the loans in if there's no grain in the elevator. They have no assets to attach, and the bank is not caring about the position of the farmers. It's just once that grain comes in, they have the right, because they have entered into forbearance. They've let the elevator go for a number of months. The elevator didn't pay. Now when the grain's in, they've got collateral they can grab because they have what are known as blanket dragnet security clauses that's going to claim all of that grain as collateral for these loans. Once that collateral's in there, they're going to grab it. Now, the farmers are arguing that that's fraudulent conduct, they misled them, so forth and so on. I think if anybody did anything bad, it would be the elevator, not the banks. I'm not sure they're suing the right party here. But that's kind of beside the point, because there are some things that farmers can do in this situation to protect themselves, and that wasn't done. From what I can tell from the court filing, that was not done in this instance.
What directly can parties do to protect their interest in a commodity that they've sold under deferred payment arrangement?
Well, the first thing you want to do in any situation where you're entering into a deferred payment arrangement is you want to make sure you understand clearly the financial status of that buyer. And what I've always suggested for years, I've preached this sermon, and I wonder sometimes whether anybody is listening. You want to get a certified audit. You want to see what the most recent audit of that buyer, of that grain elevator in this instance, shows. Now, an audit is only a snapshot, and the analogy that I use, an agricultural analogy, is it's kind of like a tick on the back of a sheep. That sheep may look pretty healthy, but it's got a tick on its back when you took the snapshot, and sooner or later, that's going to cause harm to the organism, the sheep. But if you keep that in mind, the audit can be helpful to show you at a moment in time how healthy that buyer is. Now, there may be underlying things that obviously an audit won't realize that, like our sheep in my analogy here. It's full of ticks, and there may be some problems with that. There may be some diseases that they're injecting into the organism. But when you took the picture, the organism looked healthy. That's as good as you're going to get with an audit. It is a snapshot. We just have to keep that in mind. But you need to do that. Had they done that in this instance, an audit would have revealed the lack of cash this elevator had in the spring of 2021 before they ever delivered the crops. And that should have raised some questions in their mind. So that's one thing they can do. A couple of other things they can do are use what we call letters of credit and escrow accounts. Mm-hmm. So basically what you're trying to do with a letter of credit, standby letter of credit, is say, and same thing with an escrow account, if it's a bona fide arrangement and it is completely separate from your deferral arrangement, you can get deferral for tax purposes and provide yourself some security, because the funds that the elevator in this instance would pay would not go to the farmers. It would sit in this separate account, separate and apart from any bankruptcy filing that the elevator might make. It's kind of the comparable is a Packers and Stockyards Act trust for an unpaid cash seller of livestock. Mm-hmm. We don't have this problem on the livestock side of things, because an unpaid cash seller, the way the law is supposed to work, those funds go into a statutory trust. So if the auction barn, sale barn is subject, or the buyer, market dealer, agency, whatever, is subject to the Packers and Stockyards Act, then that statutory trust applies. So if the buyer of the livestock fails before paying, the livestock producers still get paid. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, we've had some problems in that. Of course, the sale barn in Plainville in recent years shows that that can be abused. But that's how that's supposed to work. So you're trying to do the same thing on the grain side when you set up escrow accounts and letters of credit. None of that was also done in this instance, apparently, because none of that shows up in the complaint that was filed.
It does revolve back around to if you are entering into one of these deferred payment situations, you will become an unsecured creditor. Have a look at this article on Roger's blog series on the potential peril associated with deferred payment contracts. And while we've a moment, Roger, did want to have you offer a quick comment on another article that you have on your blog, and it revolves around that Build Back Better Act that has been passed by the House of Representatives, now being considered by the Senate. This has obviously been watched very closely by agriculture for the implications on agricultural interests, and there were a few developments directly of interest to agriculture that folks should know about.
Yeah, the quick response, Eric, is that this is not as bad as it could have been. There were a lot of things that got dropped out of the House version before the House passed it, and so it's not there for consideration by the Senate, and I think it's highly unlikely, with probably zero chance, that the Senate would add back in any of these provisions that have been dropped. Well, what are the good things that have been cut out? Well, we didn't get a decrease in the federal estate tax exemption, so that will go to, it's currently $11.7 million per person per decedent this year. It's go to $12.06 million next year, so that's good. The other big thing for agriculture that wasn't in there that they cut out was a change in the basis rule at death, so we still get stepped up, as it's called, stepped up basis at death. So property that passes through a decedent's estate that's included in the estate for tax purposes at death gets a new basis equal to the fair market value of that property at the time of death in the hands of the heir. Two very big things didn't make it in the bill. Plus, there's no increase in the top corporate tax rate. There's no increase in the top capital gains rate. There's no increase in the top individual income tax rate. The changes in the rules with respect to the use of trusts, that didn't make it in either. So a lot of the stuff that agriculture was really concerned about got dropped out of the House bill.
Still merits monitoring, though, and we would advise you to have a look at what Roger has put together, the summary on the selected tax provisions of House Bill number 5376 and, importantly, the economic implications of this bill. That and the other articles are found at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. And Roger, as always, we appreciate your time and your input. Thanks to you.
Thank you, Eric.
Roger McEowen is a professor of agricultural law and taxation, Washburn University School of Law, and we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
I noticed how old and wobbly they were.
That's Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
With the unusual warm weather we've had the last few weeks, I was able to catch up with a few carpentry projects. I had to make a solid workbench and 4 cavalettis, the low jumps horse trainers use. Many years ago I made 4 of the cavalettis when Martin, the equestrian, was still operating in Canada. Those 4 have lasted a long time and have moved with him to his different locations. When I watched him set up the riding ring now on his own property, Marlek Farm, Texas, I noticed how old and wobbly they were. I needed to build new ones. I laughed when he said not to build them too strong. They need to collapse when a horse stumbles. Maybe I built them slightly too strong. All he has to do is loosen the bolts which hold the rail to jump over. Being cavalettis, they're low jumps, 20 inches and 16 inches high. The workbench was my idea. It will fit easily in one bay of the big shed where shavings for the stalls and hay will be stored. The third bay is for the tractor, and other equipment, and that is where the workbench fits. It's 8 feet long, has a backboard, and is solid. Since it is solid, it is heavy. I made the workbench from salvaged and recycled lumber, 4x4 as legs, and 2x10, and 2x12, all 8 feet long for top. They're all old, used boards, but solid. I love the tall backstand. It's the side of the old kitchen cabinet friends tore out when they rebuilt their kitchen. I salvaged it as a beautiful but an awful heavy piece of wood. It was 8 feet long also. Perfect fit. As I said, I had all the lumber, and the radial arm saw was a tremendous help. I did make a few runs to the hardware store for a few bolts. I did not have enough old ones. I also needed a few new hacksaw blades, so another run to the store. At the store, I found what I needed. On my way out of the store, I noticed just to the right of the door a box with partly folded American flags. They were old, faded flags. As I walked by, they intrigued me. As I walked to the truck, I placed my purchase on the seat and I turned back into the store. Those flags were on my mind. I read the notice near the box with old flags. And I read, "These are retired flags." I know there is a special way to treat old, worn-out flags. I placed my hand on the pile of flags, and I stood there. A very strong emotion hit me. I silently walked out. Those flags have been on my mind ever since. Our American flag.
Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That's our time for today. We appreciate you listening in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.